The movie G20 has taken a lot of stick in the immediate days after its release, but this discussion video will do an honest review about the movie, its cast performances, the plot, and the bright sides. If you are interested in getting an honest review without only throwing the movie under the bus, and want to know if you can still go ahead to watch the movie, or if you have already watched it and you just want to really understand what you just watched, then this is the video for you.
Okay, let's unpack this. You sent us a fascinating collection of material all circling around the movie G20. It looks like we've got a real mix here. Some sources zeroing in on the high-octane plot and others diving deep into how the critics reacted.
Yeah, lots of different takes.
Particularly to Viola Davis's performance and, the film's topical themes. So your mission, as we see it, is to get a much clearer sense of what G20 is really about. What hit the mark, what maybe didn't.
And what it all means, I guess.
Pretty much. And ultimately, what we can learn from it all. Let's pull out some insights for you from this stack.
Sounds good. It's interesting how a film with what seems like a pretty standard action movie setup can spark such a wide range of responses.
Right.
It really makes you think about what different people are looking for when they sit down to watch a thriller.
Especially one that tries to tackle, real-world issues.
Exactly.
First off, let's lay out the basics. G20 stars Viola Davis as President Danielle Sutton. She's a former war hero. The action kicks off big time when terrorists, led by an ex-Australian Special Forces corporal named Edward Rutledge.
Got it.
They take over the G20 summit in Cape Town. Their goal is pretty ambitious. They want to mess with the global financial markets.
How?
Using deep-fake videos of world leaders and by exploiting cryptocurrency.
Wow, okay. Very 21st century.
Totally. So President Sutton has to step in to protect her family, the other world leaders, and, stop a global financial meltdown. It sounds like a truly high-stakes situation.
Definitely. Tapping into some very real worries we have about technology and global stability.
For sure.
It definitely fits into that genre of political thrillers we're familiar with, but like you said, with a contemporary edge.
Yeah.
The focus on cryptocurrency and deepfakes shows how the idea of what constitutes a threat has broadened. It's not just about physical attacks anymore.
Right.
It's about manipulating information and the flow of money.
One thing that really stands out across almost all the sources, though, is the overwhelming praise for Viola Davis's performance.
Yeah.
Words like commanding, powerful, descriptions highlighting her authority, vulnerability, and combat prowess. They just keep popping up.
That's quite the combination.
Yeah. One review even called her move into action stardom at nearly 60, inspiring and refreshing.
Wow.
This strongly suggests that no matter how people felt about other aspects of the film, Davis's portrayal was a major highlight.
The main draw, perhaps?
Maybe the key reason why many viewers stayed engaged, yeah.
No.
It makes you wonder why this particular casting and character resonates so much, a seasoned leader rather than a typical young action star.
That's a great point. It brings up the question of how we're starting to see different kinds of heroes on screen. The enthusiasm for Davis could signal a desire for protagonists who bring not just physical capability, but also like a sense of experience and weight to these roles.
Did any of the sources delve into why her performance was so impactful? Was it about her past roles informing this one, or something specific in her portrayal of President Sutton? Well, one review mentioned her ability to convey both immense strength and the emotional burden of her office.
Ah, okay. That sounds like a compelling combination.
Doesn't it? Beyond Davis, the sources also mention a few supporting performances. Ramon Rodriguez, as Secret Service agent Manny Ruiz, is noted for his unwavering loyalty and resilience. A familiar archetype, maybe.
Yeah, a classic type in these kinds of stories, but often appreciated.
And Miwa Alana Lee, who plays the South Korean First Lady Han Min-seo, apparently has a really interesting journey.
Oh.
Going from comedic relief to a poignant figure of vengeance.
Huh. That sounds like quite an arc.
It does. These details suggest that the filmmakers were aiming for more than just a central heroic figure, perhaps trying to build a more ensemble-driven narrative around the crisis.
It sounds like they were trying to layer in some interesting dynamics with these supporting characters. That evolution of the South Korean First Lady, in particular, hints at a narrative that might explore different ways people react.
And find strength.
Yeah, find strength in the face of extreme circumstances. It makes you wonder if these arcs were fully realized in the film, or if they remain somewhat secondary to the main plot.
Good question. The film also dives into some very current issues. the manipulation of cryptocurrency and deepfake technology.
Right, we mentioned those.
The plot hinges on the villains, using these tools to create chaos and, well, make a profit. This definitely gives the movie a topical feel.
Reflecting real, current global concerns.
It raises serious questions about how these technologies could be weaponized on a global scale, which is certainly something a lot of people are thinking about right now.
Absolutely. It acts as a kind of cautionary tale, doesn't it? Reflecting our collective anxieties about the increasing sophistication of digital threats.
And how easily malicious actors could potentially exploit these vulnerabilities.
On a global scale, yeah. Did the sources you looked at offer any insights into how realistically the film portrayed these technologies?
Some did, yeah. But before we get into the critiques, it's worth noting that despite the attempts at topicality, it wasn't all smooth sailing for the film in the eyes of the critics.
Oh, okay, here we go.
Several sources pointed out some significant areas for improvement. A major sticking point for some was the implausible survival scenario of the main villain, Rutledge.
What happened?
Apparently, he recovers from a really serious injury with no real consequences, just pops back up.
That kind of detail, as you can imagine, can really push the limits of what an audience is willing to believe.
Definitely tests the old suspension of disbelief.
That's a classic challenge in action films, finding that sweet spot between heightened reality and something that just feels absurd.
Right.
When plot points strain believability too much, it can definitely take the audience out of the story, no matter how strong the lead performance is.
Makes you wonder if the sources offered any suggestions on how this aspect could have been handled differently to maintain tension without sacrificing credibility.
Good point.
Another criticism that came up revolved around President Sutton's decision-making.
Her choices in the crisis.
Yeah. Apparently, her choice to spare certain antagonists ultimately leads to more problems and puts her team in unnecessary danger.
Ooh, okay.
This brings up a really interesting point about leadership in a crisis, that constant balancing act between showing compassion and making tough, pragmatic,
Sometimes unpopular decisions.
Exactly.
That's a fascinating area to explore in a character like this. Does a leader in such a high-stakes situation have the luxury of showing mercy if it jeopardizes the safety of others?
Tough question.
It raises questions about what qualities we expect from our leaders in times of crisis. Were the reviewers divided on whether her decisions were like a character flaw or just part of her character?
It seemed more like the former, actually, with the consequences feeling somewhat contrived to, create more plot.
Okay. Less organic character choice, more plot mechanism.
Seems like it. And the reliance on action tropes was also mentioned as a potential weak point.
Like
things like last-minute rescues and improbable escapes, the drill.
Yeah.
They can feel predictable, if not done really well, and might have lessened the overall impact and believability for some viewers.
It's true that audience expectations for action films have evolved. What might have felt exciting and original maybe 10, 20 years ago.
It can feel formulaic now.
Exactly. If it's not executed with a fresh perspective or a stronger sense of realism, within the genre's established rules, did any of the sources suggest specific examples of these tropes that felt particularly tired?
One mentioned a very convenient last-second intervention that just felt unearned.
Right. Deus ex machina-ish?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Overall, the critical reception appears to be mixed, landed at a 53% rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay, so right down the middle, almost.
Basically.
Yeah.
While many critics acknowledged Viola Davis's powerful performance, they often found the plot to be convoluted and some of the characters underdeveloped. One review even drew a comparison between Davis's role and Harrison Ford's iconic action heroes, like Indiana Jones or Jack Ryan.
Oh, interesting comparison.
Hinting at a potential depth to her character that perhaps wasn't fully explored in the writing.
That mixed reception really underscores the difficulty of bringing all the elements of a film together successfully, doesn't it?
For sure.
A compelling lead can certainly draw audiences in, but ultimately the surrounding narrative and characters need to be equally well-crafted to leave a lasting impression.
Yeah.
It sounds like in this case, Davis's performance might have been carrying some of the weight of a less robust story.
That's definitely the impression I get from several sources. One particularly colorful review we looked at had a very strong negative reaction.
Oh, boy.
They described the movie as hilariously earnest attempt to push the girl boss trope to its logical conclusion.
Ouch. Hilariously earnest.
Yeah. This reviewer found the dialogue stilted hackney, and the story felt like a laundry list of current-day buzzword issues.
Like crypto, deepfakes.
Exactly, that Hollywood doesn't really grasp. They're also quite critical of the direction and CGI.
Oh, so?
Said it made the probably expensive production look laughably cheap and unbelievable.
Wow. It's harsh.
It's a stark contrast to the praise for Davis, really highlighting how differently the film was perceived. When they mention the girl boss trope, what do you think they're getting at there?
Well, the girl boss trope often refers to portrayals of powerful women that some perceive as maybe inauthentic or overly aggressive.
Okay.
Or simply replicating traditionally masculine leadership styles without exploring more nuanced aspects of female leadership. This reviewer seems to be suggesting that President Sutton's character, despite Davis's strong performance, might have fallen into some of those perceived cliches.
Gotcha. This same critical voice really took issue with the basic premise.
The president fighting terrorists.
Yeah, a U.S. president engaging in physical combat. They questioned the believability of a woman nearing 60, who they mentioned had a bad knee, taking down younger and larger adversaries.
Right, the action hero aspect.
And they also poked fun at some of the plot points, like the villain's motivation
G20.
to become a crypto bajillionaire. The reviewer was like, they already had access to world leaders. Why go for crypto?
Huh. That's a point.
And the idea that creating deep fakes of G20 leaders would require them to read lines into a camera.
When there's tons of footage of them online already.
Exactly. These are pretty specific criticisms aimed at the film's internal logic.
Yeah, those points really highlight the importance of internal consistency and a degree of realism, even in an action thriller. When these kinds of logical leaps feel too significant, it can definitely erode the audience's trust in the narrative. The reviewer's point about existing footage and deepfakes is particularly interesting.
Why is that?
Well, it speaks to a potential lack of understanding of the very technology they were trying to feature.
Ah, right. The portrayal of President Sutton's teenage daughter, Serena, also came under fire in some reviews.
Okay, what about her?
She's depicted as a rebellious teenage daughter who just so happens to be a tech prodigy.
Ah, the convenient teen hacker trope.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
One reviewer was sarcastic, suggesting she should have been the main character, while another called her an insufferable cow.
Whoa, strong words.
And criticized her lack of boundaries and what seemed like a sudden shift in her opinion of her mother after seeing her fight. It sounds like this subplot didn't resonate well with some viewers. Why do you think the portrayal of the daughter might have been so problematic?
Well, it sounds like there might have been a disconnect, maybe, between the rebellious teenager trope and her sudden tech expertise.
Making her feel less believable.
Or perhaps even just a convenient plot device. And that abrupt shift in her attitude towards her mother after seeing her in combat.
Yeah, that suggests a potentially simplistic or unconvincing portrayal of character development.
Right.
It raises the question of whether this subplot was meant to explore the theme of family in crisis, but ended up feeling forced or maybe poorly executed. Yeah, possibly. Another review picked up on what they saw as loud social statements and muddy geopolitics within the film.
Okay.
They even suggested the movie exists in a parallel timeline and is a parade of cliches.
Oof.
While still acknowledging Viola Davis's authenticity and ferocious toughness, this review pointed out moments they found unrealistic and ideologically driven.
Such as?
Like dialogue about strong women facing unfair opposition and the portrayal of the British Prime Minister's initial skepticism towards the American president.
Ah, okay.
This suggests that for some viewers, the film's attempts at addressing contemporary issues felt heavy-handed or didn't quite ring true.
That's a common challenge when filmmakers try to weave social commentary into action narratives, isn't it? If these elements feel too overt or preachy, they can alienate viewers who are primarily looking for entertainment or, who might have different perspectives on those issues.
And the muddy geopolitics.
That also suggests a potential lack of clarity or maybe nuance in the film's depiction of international relations, which could further detract from its believability.
This critical perspective also highlighted some technical inaccuracies.
Ah, like with the crypto.
Exactly. Particularly in the depiction of how cryptocurrency wallets and blockchain technology work. The villain's plan to steal a Bitcoin hard drive.
Oh, dear. Yeah, that's not really how it works.
Was cited as a fundamental misunderstanding. The review also touched on the film's attempt to address contemporary fears, crypto, deepfakes, AI, the global economy, suggesting these themes were handled superficially.
Like the writers didn't fully understand them.
That was the implication. This is interesting. How important is technical accuracy in a film like this? Do audiences care?
Well, While complete total accuracy might not always be essential in fiction, right? Significant and easily avoidable errors.
Like the Bitcoin hard drive.
Exactly. Those can definitely undermine the film's credibility, especially for viewers who have some familiarity with these technologies.
Makes sense.
It suggests a lack of attention to detail that can make the whole premise feel less convincing. And that criticism of superficial engagement with complex themes, that also points to a desire maybe for more depth and understanding when these real-world issues are brought into a fictional narrative.
Right. Not just buzzwords.
Precisely.
Okay, so despite all these criticisms, some sources did point to underlying themes of loyalty and family as strong elements.
So some emotional core there.
Yeah. The unwavering loyalty of Agent Manny Ruiz was highlighted, as were the bonds within President Sutton's family that were tested and ultimately reinforced during the crisis.
Okay.
This suggests that even amidst the high-octane action and political intrigue, there was an emotional core to the story that resonated with some viewers.
Exactly. The exploration of loyalty and family in the face of extreme pressure is a timeless theme, really. It can connect with audiences regardless of their opinions on the film's more action-oriented or political aspects. These personal relationships can provide an anchor for the narrative.
And add emotional depth.
Yeah, add a layer of emotional depth that transcends the spectacle.
One interesting detail that came up was President Sutton's backstory.
The war hero thing.
Yeah. Apparently, she was famously photographed carrying a child out of a war zone, and this is presented as a key factor in her rise to power.
Okay, adds context.
It adds another layer to her character and potentially explains her combat skills. But, as we've seen with other plot points, one review questioned the authenticity of this narrative device.
So even elements meant to add depth were met with skepticism by some.
Seems like it.
That's a risk with any kind of backstory reveal, isn't it? It needs to feel organic and believable within the context of the character and the overall narrative.
Otherwise.
If it comes across as contrived or overly convenient, it can have the opposite of the intended effect and make the character feel less authentic.
Got it. The sources also touched briefly on the visual aspect.
How it looked.
Yeah. One negative review specifically mentioned a heavy reliance on green screens and digital backgrounds, which they felt contributed to a sense of, low production value, despite the film likely having a significant budget.
Interesting. Made it look cheap, basically.
That was their take.
Yep.
And the inconsistent color of President Sutton's dress, apparently red in the trailer but orange in the movie, was also noted.
Huh. That's an odd detail to mess up.
A somewhat odd and maybe distracting detail, yeah. It's interesting how these seemingly small visual inconsistencies can impact the overall perception of the film.
Absolutely. These kinds of technical details, while they might seem minor on their own, can collectively contribute to the overall viewing experience.
Right.
Perceived low production value or inconsistencies in visual elements can distract from the narrative and lessen the audience's immersion in the film's world.
So after this deep dive into the various perspectives on G20, it seems pretty clear that this is a film that sparked some really strong and often conflicting reactions.
Definitely sounds like it.
Viola Davis's performance appears to be a nearly universal bright spot. But the plot, the development of other characters, and the way it handled its topical themes were all points of significant debate among the critics.
That really highlights the complexity of filmmaking, doesn't it? And how different elements can either connect strongly with viewers or, fail to land effectively.
Yeah.
G20 seems like a case where a powerful central performance wasn't quite enough to overcome perceived weaknesses in other crucial aspects of the production for many critics and audience members.
So thinking about this for you, after looking at all these different angles on G20, what are the key things to take away?
Right.
It sounds like this is a movie with a truly compelling central performance by Viola Davis, offering a fresh take on the traditional action hero.
Definitely a highlight.
It also took on the ambitious task of engaging with some very relevant issues around technology and global finance.
Yeah.
However,
That was a however.
it seems the execution in terms of plot, character decisions, and perhaps a reliance on familiar action movie cliches is where opinions really diverged sharply.
You've definitely gained a much more nuanced understanding of the film than you would from just a quick summary.
Hope so.
You've seen the consistent praise for Davis's commanding presence and the film's ambition in tackling contemporary anxieties, but you're also now aware of the significant criticisms regarding its believability.
The villain surviving the president's choices.
Right. And the potential underdevelopment of supporting characters and the feeling by some that its engagement with complex issues was somewhat superficial.
The contrasting viewpoints in our sources really demonstrate how differently individuals can react to the same piece of content, don't they?
Absolutely.
Maybe G20 is a film best approached with a balanced perspective, appreciating Viola Davis's undeniable talent, while also being aware of the potential shortcomings that some critics and viewers identified in its narrative and execution.
That sounds like a fair assessment based on what we've discussed. And this deep dive leaves us with maybe a provocative thought for you.
Okay.
When a film tries to blend high-stakes action with reflections on real-world anxieties like technological threats, global instability, how do we as viewers weigh the effectiveness of each of those elements? Does a strong central performance forgive some narrative weaknesses, or does the overall coherence of the story ultimately determine our experience?
That's a really good question.
G20 and its mixed reception certainly gives us a lot to consider on that front. We hope this exploration has given you a much clearer picture of the film and its place in the current cinematic landscape.